Welcome to Secure Freedom Radio. This is Frank Gaffney, your host and guide for what I think of as an intelligence briefing on the war for the free world. We have been witnessing with quite a high drama the Senate deliberations this past week on the so-called Corker-Cardin legislation that is intended, we're told by its sponsors, to give Congress some kind of say or vote, at least, on the agreement President Obama is determined to secure with the Iranians. A man who has stood for the constitutional arrangement for that kind of advice and consent by the United States Senate is our guest in this first block of Secure Freedom Radio. He is Senator Ron Johnson, a businessman and accountant by training and practice in his native state of Wisconsin, now the chairman of the Senate Homeland Security and Government Affairs Committee, and also a senior member of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. Senator Johnson, first of all, let me just express my profound appreciation for your leadership in trying to get the Senate to do its duty by considering this agreement, if it comes, as a treaty. Welcome back, sir. It's great to have you with us.
Well, Frank, and appreciate that. I'd like to just start with the main point here. For literally years, I've been hearing presidents of both parties, members of Congress of both parties, just pronouncing that we simply cannot allow Iran to get a nuclear weapon, because it's obvious how terrible that is going to be for regional security and world peace. And yet now we have a president who lost a negotiation from the get-go by relaxing sanctions and acknowledging, basically, Iran has a right to enrich uranium, even though UN resolutions dating back to 2006 put sanctions in place, and the only way they were going to be lifted is if Iran suspended or halted their enrichment program. And so, I don't see a good deal coming out of this outcome. And the issues I've been raising is, first we need to understand that this president is so brazen and arrogant that he is entering into these negotiations and entering into an agreement that he's going to, on his own authority, is just an executive agreement. According to our Constitution, Article 2, Section 2, the president does have the power to negotiate treaties between nations, but it is with the advice and consent of the Senate. What's somewhat dubious is any kind of international agreement that varies from that type of approval process. And Frank, there's no set criteria that says something's a treaty or a congressional executive agreement, or just an executive agreement. That's really based on, what determines that is how it's approved. And so a treaty would be approved by 67 senators in the current makeup, two-thirds of the Senate. A congressional executive agreement would have to be approved by both chambers, both the House and the Senate. And, of course, an executive agreement, which is what this president is claiming this consequential deal with Iran would be, is simply an executive agreement that he can just undertake and commit America to on his own authority. And so I've been trying to highlight what the bill, and listen, the problem Bob Corker has, Senator Corker has, is he's dealing with Democrats who will only agree to the most minimal role. And I've just been trying to highlight exactly what that means, and let me tell you what it means. It means that a really bad deal with Iran could be approved with basically 34 senators approving it, with the rest of us thinking it's a really bad deal. That is turning advice and consent on its head.
The framers understood that if there weren't this kind of check and balance on executive authority, you would find the Senate being essentially cast aside, the Congress more generally being cast aside, as the president pursues treaties or agreements or other arrangements with foreign powers that could mutate beyond recognition our polity, our republic, our constitution, and so on. And, Senator, I just have to ask, what was it operating, as best you can tell, among the majority, including 11 of your Republican colleagues, that would cause them willingly to participate in this egregious diminution of the power of the institution in which you all serve?
Well, again, let me blame the Democrats. I mean, it's just true. The Democrats are by and large happy, apparently, to let President Obama negotiate this treaty and be done with it. And so at least there are a few Democrats who are willing to say, well, hang on here. Involved in this deal is the fact that we have sanctions that were voted on, approved, and imposed by Congress. And so even though Congress offered this waiver to the president, on all these bills that impose sanctions, there was a waiver for national security interests. And, that makes sense. Nobody contemplated that this president would abuse that waiver power the way he's abusing it right now. And so there are a few Democrats that said, we really ought to be involved, but they're only willing to be involved at this just bare minimum level.
And in fact, I think it doesn't do justice to say it's at the bare minimum. As you've indicated, Senator Ron Johnson, it is a Potemkin exercise. You cannot actually really now expect to vote down this agreement under the arrangement that the Corker-Cardin bill represents, does it?
I was really trying to offer three amendments: deeming it a treaty, which needs 67 votes; deeming it an congressional executive agreement. I was even willing to go expedited procedure, so it just required a majority vote. I mean, to me, that's the bare minimum involvement. A majority affirmative vote to approve the deal. I also tried to put in an amendment that actually would clarify what this approval process really was, and I was calling it a low-threshold congressional approval of a treaty. And that would have allowed the deal to be approved with just 34 senators. Now, the parliamentarian appropriately and correctly ruled that out of order, unconstitutional, because you can't pass something with just 34 votes. Precisely the point I was trying to make.
Senator, let me just turn this to another topic that's very much related to this. Your friend and mine, Congressman Trent Franks, has observed that the Iranians have recently promulgated a doctrine for their military, which involves on more than 20 different occasions a reference to the use of electromagnetic pulse in an attack against the United States. Were Iran to get the bomb, and I personally believe that they are very much determined to do that, and we're legitimating their efforts to do so, and they get the ballistic missiles with which to deliver it here, perhaps long-range ones, as they're getting now, or short-range ones, which they have in abundance delivered off of ships. And we were to see an electromagnetic pulse attack against this country, as you know, it would be devastating to our electric grid and to the nation as a whole. You and I have talked about this before, and I know you have indicated a very strong commitment to trying, as part of your Homeland Security oversight responsibilities, to get our electric grid made more resilient against these and other kinds of attacks. How important is that, especially if we're witnessing now essentially the green lighting of this nuclear program in Iran?
No, we are whistling past the graveyard. If we don't turn our attention to what we really ought to start doing is provide some measure of protection for our electrical grid. Frank, what drives me crazy is, all the harm, all the information was declassified on EMP. We've known about this for decades when we first started testing nuclear weapons in the South Pacific and the harmful effect on electronics. And we declassified this in 2004 with the commission and then again in 2008. So this was very well known, the danger we face with a nuclear device that's exploded somewhere up in the atmosphere and how devastating that'd be for electronics and for our electrical grid. I mean, shut it down. And yet, there are some things we could do. For example, we can buy spare transformers, keep them offline and shield them so that they're readily available. Right now, some of these transformers, these large ones, they're 2 years in terms of lead time. If we don't have those backup transformers and there's a nuclear attack like that, and again, with this deal, we put Iran on a path to become a nuclear power. They have ballistic missile technology. It's becoming more and more sophisticated. How many years are we away from Iran having not only a nuclear capability, but also the type of intercontinental or satellite technology? Just throw up a satellite, let it, with a nuclear weapon in it. I don't want to scare your listeners, but at the same time, we can't bury our head in the sand on this thing. We need to start taking the measures now. And, James Woolsey wrote, a thoughtful piece in the Wall Street Journal talking about a $2 billion price tag. I think that's low. I think he admits that too. This is kind of a down payment. This provides some protection, some backup. We need to make sure that America collectively admits we have this problem, so there's the political will to address it. You mentioned Trent Franks, and he's been a real leader in the House on that, and I applaud his efforts.
Well, we applaud yours as well, and look forward to more of them in the future on this and so many other issues. Again, Senator Ron Johnson of Wisconsin, keep it up, sir. Come back to us again if you would. We're very grateful to you. Steve Camarada joins us next on Immigration Straight Ahead.